Welcome to a new week of all things people, power, and politics on Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. You know, there's no escape from political news, and it really seems like things are changing by the second. And social media can just make things a little more confusing. So take my advice. Throw the phone aside and just hang with us here for the straight facts, at least for the next half hour. Plus, we could all use a break from our phones. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are getting ready at this hour to start high-level talks to end the war in Ukraine. Now, what we're hearing from President Trump as well as Ukraine's leader, plus the Trump administration deporting hundreds of immigrants right as a federal judge issues an order blocking them from using a centuries-old law to do that. What went down and why the White House says they didn't disregard the order. All of that's coming up in about 20 minutes. But we begin tonight by hitting rewind to November. You know, it's no secret the election didn't go the way Democrats wanted. That's actually putting it nicely. They missed the mark, forgot those who had the least and needed the most economically, and they leaned in on social issues that some say weren't the top priorities for anybody, even though they were still important. Now, since the election, Dems have been taking a hard look in the mirror, an about face, trying to figure out if their message needs an overhaul or just a tweak. But one of the starkest examples of the message not landing might have been in Wayne County, at least for Metro Detroit. So the easiest way to tell this story is to go by the numbers. So first, let's take a look at the election results from Wayne County, and we're only factoring in the two major parties here. Former Vice President Harris ended up with roughly 62% of the vote. There it is, right over here, with President Trump getting about 34% of the vote. Wayne County. Remember, he got 20,000 people in Detroit who voted for him. A decisive victory, but when you dive deeper, that's where you can really start to see the issues this campaign had. Take a look. This goes all the way back to 2008, when President Obama got a whopping 74% of the vote. You remember that? That was a pretty big number. You can see, looking at this, Vice President Harris did the worst of all the Democratic candidates when it comes to vote percentage in Wayne County. In fact, I want you to pay attention to this. Since 2000, the only two candidates to not get at least 68% of the vote are Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton back in 2016. Watch this, 66%. That was considered the low mark when Clinton ran. And then guess what happened? Harris ended up with lower than that in Wayne County, 62%. President Trump, of course, won Michigan and the White House both times. Clinton actually did better than Harris. She got roughly 66% of the total vote. So it's just an interesting graph that really highlights what the problem was. We're going to be taking a closer look at this coming up in a few moments. You know, since November, there's been a debate about how the party should move forward. And the Democratic divides couldn't have been more stark last week when that budget battle was happening on Capitol Hill. You remember this? Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer got a small group of Democrats to push the spending bill over the line after saying he wouldn't vote for it earlier in the week. Schumer's reason? Well, he said a shutdown would give the Trump administration too much power. But that really infuriated many Democrats who say, hey, we just handed the president a victory. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell had this to say about Schumer's decision on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday. Take a listen.
Senator Murphy of Connecticut was on another network this morning, and he said it would have been a risk to shut down the government, but it was probably worth taking.
You know,
do you agree?
Well, in the House, we were almost united save one, and there were very strong feelings in the House about what people thought that the Senate should do.
But the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, would say you were able to do that because there was wiggle room on votes. The Republicans
I think he sent out mixed signals. I think if
Schumer did.
Senator Schumer sent out mixed signals, and I talked to a lot of laborers last week. AFGE, whose employees were going to be impacted the most, were very torn about what to do because concerned about their employees, who I'm meeting with daily. When I'm out there, came out against supporting it because they felt like they were already being harmed. There was already just a license for DOJ to go ahead and do whatever it wants. They're not, including Congress, not abiding with it. People are being hurt.
I want to say the Democratic Party is fractured by any means, but certainly you see a line there and you see a divide. We're asking Sam Robinson and Malachi Barrett, two journalists here, what they're hearing from Democrats in Wayne County and beyond, because so much of what has happened there can impact the future. And so many people are curious about what will happen the next time Democrats decide to run. Plus, we're checking in on the races for mayor and governor. All of that's coming up in about 10 minutes. Now to the Pulse mailbox, because we say this all the time and we mean it when we say this show's all about you. We always welcome your comments about the show, but you know what I really want to hear? Your questions. What do you want to know about? In this world of social media, when you look at your phone, you don't know what's true, what's not. Ask us. In fact, Fred wrote to me just a few days ago and he says, hey, I want to know if America is really getting ripped off when it comes to trade and why the president isn't going after people who don't pay their fair share of taxes. Well, Fred, thank you for writing us again, and thank you for watching. And once again, the best way to answer your question is to go by the numbers. You see, we went back with the help of Pulse producer Aaron Jordan and took a look at data from the Census Bureau when it comes to the trade of goods. And this goes all the way back to 1987. The U.S. has actually been in the hole since then. A deficit that's climbed every single year, even when President Trump was in office the first time. So you can't say Trump fixed it all. It was a problem. Simply put, we import more than we export. For the most part, that deficit had been in the billions. But last year, the trade in goods was a whopping $1.2 trillion deficit. Think about that, $1.2 trillion. Republicans and Democrats both agree, hey, we got to fix this. There's a trade imbalance here. We know that, and something has to be done. Democrat Sean Fain, of course, with the UAW, who supported Biden in the election, even praised President Trump a few weeks ago for his aggressive actions to try to balance this problem out. And for your second question about back taxes, well, guess what? The Treasury Department, under the Biden administration, actually started a program to go after wealthy taxpayers who hadn't filed taxes since, get this, 2017. The Treasury said the program was simply underfunded, and so it would run sporadically over the next year. But in the first 6 months alone, it collected $172 million from nearly 21,000 people. Now, if you're comparing, the trade deficits far outweigh the unpaid taxes, Fred, and that's just another example of how we're working for you by answering your questions. And let's be real, politics can be confusing, and so many people depend on social media followers and friends to bring them the news. As you like to say, how's that working out for you? We're often misled with rumors being reported as facts. That's not how we work here. We will check, verify, double and triple check to make sure what you hear is real right here. So if you have a question you want answered, send us an email to thepulse@fox.com, or you can scan the QR code to auto-launch your email. It goes to both myself and my team of producers, and we'll try to get your question answered on the air, because it's like your teacher told you in school. If you have a question, chances are you aren't the only one. I was also told there's no such thing as a stupid question. We'll see. Some of President Biden's pardons are potentially at risk of being struck down at this hour. President Trump claims many of the pardons he signed were done with the use of an auto pen. In other words, an automatic printed signature like a stamp that comes from like a machine. Trump says because of the use of an auto pen, the pardons are void. So if you're wondering what the heck is an auto pen, well, here's your answer. It's a device used to duplicate signatures. It uses actual ink and makes it easier for public figures to sign everything from documents to merchandise if you're a big star. It's something that's been around for decades. The president claiming Biden didn't even know about the pardons he was signing. But here's the thing. It's just not known if Biden signed pardons with auto pens at all. But there are several examples of him signing things by hand that we see on camera. Now, legal experts tell the BBC there's nothing in U.S. law saying official documents aren't legally binding if they're signed with an auto pen, that machine. There's actually nothing in the law that says it even has to be signed at all. Does this make sense to you? The Constitution doesn't require a pardon to be written at all. We wanted to bring our own legal expert in to talk about this because we're lucky at Fox 2. We have Charlie Langton. And when you have a legal question, and if you do, you should tell us. The man, the myth, the legend. Thank you so much. Anchor, Charlie Langton. Look, I have my pen.
Yeah.
And I can sign this right now, Charlie. First of all, thanks for joining us.
Please
Watch
sign
it.
it.
So I'm going to sign this right here. That's a signature. People.
Is that really your signature?
It's pretty bad.
That is
my parents said
pretty
I
bad.
should be a doctor. They wouldn't trust me with a scalpel. Trust me. But I do have to ask you. So auto pen, it's like a printer, right? It's like a machine, and you just go feed stuff in there and it signs it? Right?
Everyone uses it. I mean, many people use it because politicians especially, they've got to sign a lot of documents. And so it's a machine. They stick a real pen in the machine and it traces that. It may be a little harder than others, but nevertheless, they do it. But here's the deal. I don't know if Biden signed pardons with an auto pen or not. It doesn't make a difference. Michigan does have a law regarding electronic signatures. Now, I know this is the federal and Michigan. However, Michigan and most states have, it's called the Electronic Documents Act, and it allows for, you could have an auto pen, sign a document, it is totally legal. I would be shocked if somehow Trump could make the argument that even if the document, a presidential pardon, was signed by an electronic pen, that it is not legit. It still goes to intent.
It's so interesting to me. And so, like, for instance, we bought our house 4 years ago, and my wife and I both got the document to sign our mortgage, and we did it, like, on our computer. And it was like an auto-generated signature. the argument that the president, with all due respect, is using here is that my mortgage may not be valid because it wasn't signed by me, by my hand. Is that the argument that he's using, essentially?
You can go to the Coney Island and pay by a credit card, and they stick it in a machine, and you sign with your finger. Right. This has become my pen.
That's your auto pen.
Many things. This is the auto pen right here. I sign with a pen. It's totally legal. There's no way. So what is he doing? So why would he even bring this up? Probably because he wants to divert attention. And I think he's thinking, you know what? I don't think Trump thought of this. I think some of the aides said, you know what? Let's do an auto pen. Let's float it out there and see what happens. Maybe divert a little bit from the tariff issues. Maybe divert a little bit from Yemen, what's going on. Maybe divert a little bit from whatever.
Or the incoming Russian talks, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Because he's got to go to Russia tomorrow. So, yes, there's a lot of things. And you know what? Some channels will give it some attention. It is an interesting argument, but it's not going to fly legally at all.
Heck, the president bought 7 minutes just now talking about it, right? Just a few minutes.
He did.
But I got to ask, so in the past, though, because we like to think of things in the Trump era as just new stuff. Like, people talk about the Department of Education being disbanded. They've been talking about that since 1980, right? That's not a Trump thing. But the auto pen has been argued about in politics for years. I think it was former President Obama who signed the Patriot Act when he was out of town with the use of an auto pen back in Washington. And people were Republicans.
Don't say that. Trump's watching the show. He may say, you know what, let's get rid of that too.
But Republicans at the time did say, hey, what are you doing here? But the bottom line is, it's been used all the way back since like Lyndon Johnson's time. So this is something that presidents have a lot of work to do with their pens.
I think it's a convenience. It's the intent of the act. I don't think presidents just create these things. I think they filter it. And if they want to have a president, listen, presidential pardons for sure is very powerful. And then presidential executive orders are extremely powerful. And so I think I'm waiting for a case that goes up to test the extent of what a president can do with an executive order. I think that's the more legal issue. I don't care about this pen.
That, like you said, could be a distraction.
But I think it's a distraction. I think it's something floating. But I think someone will take it up. I think some judge, and I think that case could go to the Supreme Court. Because what can a presidential pardon, not the pardon, it's the executive order. And I have a feeling that if no one else, like money issues, that's got to originate in Congress. If there's another body of government that can do what the executive order says, it's probably not allowed. But if the president can, like straws or naming the Gulf of Mexico or America, well, he could probably do that.
One last question I have for you is, according to the Constitution, I think it's, I say this not casually, I did read about this. Article 2, Section 2 says,
you have to read that, yeah.
Is that right? That you don't have to technically have a signature for binding anything when it comes to for these kinds of pardons. That's interesting to me. Does that surprise you that in general that we don't have something that says you got to have a signature?
No, but I do think we need a writing. I think that we run astray. In the law, judges speak through their written orders, and that's a big deal for a lot of things. You got to have a written order. I would think it would be the same thing with a presidential executive order.
Charlie Langton covering St. Patrick's Day tonight, coming back to our studio to do this show. A busy guy. We always love having you. We'll see you very soon.
It's always good. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. We're diving into several issues impacting Detroit voters after the break. He has my signature now. What they say went wrong for Democrats as we look ahead to two big races. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. These are dangerous, these signatures.
Could have made it on eBay. I could have made a lot of money with that.
We'll be right back. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about the Democratic divide, the race for Detroit mayor, and next year's race for governor. Sam Robinson with Detroit 1 Million and Malachi Barrett with Bridge Detroit. Good to see you, gentlemen. We only have a few minutes, so let's get right to it. Sam, I want to begin with you. Kamala Harris in Wayne County, 62% of the vote is what she ended up getting. That is the lowest in a long time for Democrats in Wayne County. 62%, the lowest it had been in years. I think it was 66% was Hillary Clinton back in 2016. She did not do well in Wayne County. Has the Democratic Party learned from their mistakes from this past election?
I'm hearing from a number of candidates running for governor, running for mayor, that are willing to distance themselves from their bosses or sort of their most popular sort of Duggan. You hear Mary Sheffield talk about, well, I am going to be different than Mike Duggan, while not completely separating herself. You talk to Garland Gilchrist and Jocelyn Benson, they say, well, here's how I will be different from Governor Whitmer, not fully separating themselves and certainly still championing their wins. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, as you point out, the fact that Kamala was a black woman did not really seem to matter here in Wayne County and in Detroit.
You know, it's interesting because you hear people trying to differentiate themselves, as Sam astutely just put that. You know, Whitmer is hanging out, and she would take issue with me using that language, but twice in 3 or 4 weeks been at the White House, currying the favor of President Donald Trump, willing to work with him. Yet Garland Gilchrist, the lieutenant governor, is like, you know, that's where I break from the governor. I think we need to really push back on some things. That's a kind of a daring and bold move, but he needs to make that, doesn't he, Malachi?
Yeah, I think he's got a little bit more leeway. Being lieutenant governor still, you know, the governor has to work with the president one way or another, so I think it's important for her role to go up there and try to see what kind of compromises or common ground could be had. But Garland, and we'll probably hear from Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Jeff Swanson as well, I think they're going to all run as people who are going to be oppositional. I think there's a lot of frustration with the National Democratic Party about how they've been and how they haven't really been resisting a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing. Are they operating as a minority party or as an oppositional party? Garland has said in interviews that he's going to fight against the Trump administration. Again, I think we'll probably hear that from our other candidates as well.
Oh, when you fight against the Trump administration, if you look at history, don't go that far back, you become that person from Michigan. Governor Gretchen Whitmer was that woman from Michigan during COVID, and now she is literally hanging out and finding her way to talk to Trump. That's going to make a difference for her, though, politically as well, won't it?
She thinks so. I think the folks that I talked to after the State of this state back in Lansing a few weeks back tell me that she's meeting the moment. I had a few progressive Democrats say, if meeting the moment is cozying up to Trump, I don't want to be anywhere near this moment. It's a delicate time for Democrats who have to figure out which way they want to go. Governor Whitmer, according to Steve Bannon today, Craig Maugard tweeted this out this morning on Bannon's podcast. He said that Whitmer was elbowing her way to get to the president to talk about tariffs, talk about manufacturing and jobs in Michigan. The border to the north, you know, a lot of attention is paid to the southern border, but of course we have the largest international border here in Michigan with Canada.
And that's really something that this president also should keep in mind. Talking to Governor Whitmer, he could learn a thing or two from her like he has from the big three CEOs, right, Malachi? I
think a lot of the state leaders have done a lot to try to build goodwill with Canada, and that is being undermined right now with this trade war that is changing by the day, but you know, 25% tariffs are coming down soon, it seems like. I think the stat is like 20-some% of our international trade comes through Detroit, through that either the port or the bridge. Most of it comes over the bridge. I don't know, it's gonna economically affect our state probably more than most in the country, and so Whitmer is kind of right at the center of that.
Let's talk for a moment about the redefinition of the blue, of this sea of blue. We saw what didn't work with Kamala Harris and with Walz. And now you have, for instance, replying to the president, you had Senator Alyssa Slotkin. Was that a way for the Democratic Party to say, hey, we're not who you thought we were. Look, we have these new faces?
I think it was. Alyssa Slotkin has been known to be sort of a you know, considerate moderate. She certainly will break with moderates to say some poignant things on issues like Gaza. Alyssa Slotkin did not curry any favor, though, with the folks that are uncomfortable with Governor Whitmer's sort of new groove, sort of being the moderate governor appealing to conservatives on issues like the male gender gap or regulations, like issues with Laura, business, red tape. You know, we'll see if it resonates with folks come 2026.
And finally, let's talk about the mayoral race. Chief James Craig putting his hat into the ring. What does that do to this race, Malachi?
Well, we have a real conservative on the ballot now, a staunch Republican, unapologetically a Trump supporter. How does that change things in a city and a county where Republicans, as you noted, have been gaining a bigger voting share? I went back to 2008 to now. Basically, Republicans went from earning about a quarter of the votes to 2/3. And that's, you know, sizable in a county where a lot of the Democratic votes come from. So I don't know how that's going to affect the mayoral race. And it's interesting when you look at the gubernatorial numbers for Wayne County, it's been a little bit more up and down, where you've seen a real consistent downward trend for Democrats in the presidential races. But you know, there's some movement to tap into in the county that he might be able to do.
Last question with 20 seconds left. Are people compelled to go vote for this next mayor or this next governor?
I think so. People are telling me that they think it might be a historic turnout with early voting and absentee.
People are excited by all the choices. I think they're still waiting to hear someone who has good ideas, and it's early in the race. But I think the main problem that Democrats have is articulating what is their message to voters. What are they going to do to improve their lives? How are they going to improve people's wages? Because they just failed to really lay that out in 24.
Well, one thing that these candidates have learned, perhaps if they want to, from the Harris camp, is that you don't just talk to traditional media. You talk to media that have hardcore good journalists like Malachi Barrett with Bridge, and of course with Sam Robinson with his 1 million in the Substack. You're doing great work. Thanks for being with us here on the Pulse tonight. Appreciate it. A lot of political news to get you caught up on, including why the president's move to deport hundreds of immigrants ended up back in court today. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to The Pulse here on this Monday night. As we said off the top, there's never a shortage of political news, so let's dive into some of the other big stories we're following tonight, starting with what could be a big week for the war in Ukraine. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are expected to talk this week as the U.S. tries to get both sides to agree to a ceasefire. Special envoy Steve Witkoff told the Sunday morning talk show circuit that they're hopeful the war could end within weeks. The president himself told reporters what would be talked about, while Russian President Vladimir Zelensky says giving up Ukrainian territory the Russians are occupying could be a non-starter.
We'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
We will do everything to make diplomacy effective, but every day now is about defending our independence, our state, and our people.
President Trump also says more sanctions against Russia could happen if they don't stop their push in eastern Ukraine. A lot to unpack with this week, and of course the Pulse will be on top of it every single night. Turning to the border and the controversial move by the Trump administration, hundreds of immigrants deported to El Salvador using what's called the Alien Enemies Act as a judge issues an order blocking them from doing just that. The planes were in the air when the order came down. The judge verbally ordered them to turn around, but it wasn't in his written order, and the planes just kept on going. In court, the DOJ argued only the written order needed to be followed, but the judge responded by saying, quote, "That's one heck of a stretch." Now, if you're wondering what the Alien Enemies Act is, it's a law that dates back to 1798. Congress passed several laws when the U.S. thought it would be going to war with France. Now, that law gives residents vast powers to imprison or deport non-citizens during wartime. But here's the thing. It's only been used 3 times during the War of 1812, World War I, and then World War II. And remember, Congress has sole power to declare war. And the last time they did that was actually World War II. A little education for you tonight. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks, as always, for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As usual, I'll see you back here tomorrow night. Good night.